Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of PEM Rules, the Pediatric Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Yaron Ivan, as usual. And today, some more important rules that hopefully will help you take care of your patients. Rule number 168. You always know at least one thing about the patient, statistics, or epidemiology. So this goes back to what I tell the residents and the fellows all the time. In order to be a physician or a PEM physician, it's really helpful to know a lot, or as much as possible, of epidemiology and statistics. Again, always good to give an example. So in the pediatric emergency medicine department, almost daily I see patients with complaint of chest pain. It's almost always a young, healthy male or female with no past medical history who's coming in with chief complaint of chest pain. And I think it's very important to approach those patients knowing some basic epidemiology and statistics. That helps you figure out your pretest probability before you go down the rabbit hole of EKG, chest x-ray, or some other tests that you think you may need to do. So I'm aware of two very good studies that I will put in the show notes about the frequency or the prevalence of significant, serious, aka cardiac causes of chest pain. The first study I'm aware of was published in 2011 in the Journal of Emergency Medicine, and that study was done in a tertiary pediatric emergency department that reviewed the charts of more than 4,000 children and adolescents with complaints of chest pain. That study basically discovered that only 0.6% of pediatric chest pains were actually of a cardiac-related cause or cardiac-related chest pain. Of the non-cardiac chest pain, 56% were found to have musculoskeletal causes or unspecified chest pain. In other words, the big majority, huge majority, was not a cardiac etiology. Another study that was published in one of my favorite journals, Pediatric Emergency Care, in 2018 by Dr. Mohan. That study was looking to evaluate the impact of chest pain pathway on resources utilization at a major children's hospital. They found that EKG was obtained in almost half of the patients. However, cardiac cause of chest pain was only found in 0.65%, very similar to the previous study. And this is where epidemiology becomes very important. So when you see a child with chest pain, before you even enter the room, you know one important thing. Based on some good evidence, there's only about 0.6 or 0.65% this patient, assuming he or she are healthy average teenagers or kids, have about 0.65% of having cardiac-related cause for their chest pain. That goes back to a very important and quite basic epidemiology or statistic term known as the pretest probability. The pretest probability is simply defined as the probability of the screened person having the disease. In other words, the probability of this person having cardiac cause of chest pain. It's 0.65% before even entering the room, again, assuming it's a normal, healthy, average child. And I think that is a very important piece of information before you decide to obtain a chest x-ray, get an EKG, or maybe some other studies. You have about 0.65% of having or finding cardiac cause. So knowing some basic epidemiology of some basic chief complaints is extremely helpful. I must admit, I'm not a very knowledgeable person in the field of biostatistics, but a basic terminology or a basic term such as pretest probability, I think we all need to be familiar with, and it's the probability of the screened person having the disease. Know some basic epidemiology before you go down the rabbit hole of testing and investigating the chief complaint. If you got a normal, healthy child with a normal physical exam and normal vital signs on a chief complaint that has such a low likelihood of being serious, you can feel comfortable not testing and not observing and not admitting and making sure the parents know what to watch for and what to come back for and sending them home. Not every patient with chest pain, and based on these statistics, a big majority of patients with chest pain do not need an EKG, do not need a chest x-ray, they have no cardiac cause. So remember rule number 168. You always know at least one thing, statistics. Rule number 169. Do whatever is comfortable for the patient. So this rule comes into play when the science is actually not very clear about what to do for the patient. A good example is a concussion. There's no treatment that is actually curative for a patient with concussion. And yes, there is something called second impact syndrome where the patient can put itself or herself at risk if they get another concussion before recovering. That is important for the patient to know. But as far as treatment is concerned, the patient is free to do whatever is comfortable for them. Another good example is a patient I recently saw in the pediatric emergency department. So this patient was actually my PA's patient, sustained very, very small proximal finger fracture. In fact, he actually had two finger fractures right next to each other, proximal failings, very small, no displacement. And the PA came to me and asked Yaron, what should I do? What's better for the patient? Should I just buddy tape them? Should I put an ulnar gutter? What do you recommend? I looked at the x-ray, agreed with the radiologist, of course, very, very tiny proximal phalanx fracture, no displacement. Under this situation, I would argue, do what's best for the patient. This is a young patient with a very minor injury that will heal regardless to what you do. In this situation, it's probably a good idea to do some shared decision making with the patient and see what is comfortable for them. So when you're facing with a situation when really there's several treatments or no specific evidence-based treatment, discuss with the patient and see what's comfortable for them. Do what is comfortable for them, assuming there are several options. Rule number 170. Be curious, not judgmental. I'd like to thank Dr. Todd Zimmerman from Las Vegas Pediatric Emergency Department at Sunrise Children's Hospital for this rule. I actually interviewed Dr. Zimmerman in episode 88, which was published in May of last year. And this rule is one of those that is easier said than done. I completely agree. I asked Dr. Zimmerman, what does that rule mean to you? And here is what he had to say. Well, first, it's not exactly his rule. This is a quote by Ted Lasso, which is a fictional character from a movie of some sorts. Never heard of it, but thank you, Ted, for that rule. And Dr. Todd Zimmerman interprets this rule this way. Anyone, not just leaders and physicians in medicine, are confronted every day, multiple times a day, with things, issues, or problems that you may not agree with. Things that you see other people do, but you don't necessarily see the same way. It is far too easy and natural for the observer to feel that the other person's viewpoint is wrong and to somehow go down the path that you see or you think is better. But you really start to learn and grow and understand people and why people think the way they think or the way they do, whether it's right or wrong, when you truly want to understand how and why people do what they do. When you truly want to understand the how and why of how others view things. Be curious, ask questions about it, digest and think about what others see and how they see it. You learn so much that way, and you may be swayed, and appropriately so, to change, to pivot your thoughts, or on the other hand, it may solidify that your thoughts are proper and you can now guide other people towards the right path. So it's always a good idea to be curious but not judgmental on things you don't agree with by default. Thank you, Todd Zimmerman, for that rule. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you very much for listening. Let's review what we learned. Rule number 168. You always know at least one thing, statistics. Know the basic epidemiology of some basic chief complaints you see all the time, and know what your pretest probability is before you go down the rabbit hole of testing. Rule number 169. Do whatever is comfortable for the patient. Sometimes, many times, there's no one way, there's no right way, there's no evidence-based way to treat a patient. Under those circumstances, it's very reasonable to do whatever is comfortable for the patient. If there's no one proven treatment for the condition you just discovered the patient has, do whatever is comfortable for the patient. Rule number 170, be curious, not judgmental. Ask question and try to digest what other people do or see that you don't agree with, trying to truly understand them before you develop any judgment. By doing so, you may find that your way was wrong and may adopt a new way, or it may solidify for yourself that what you're doing is the right thing to do. But it is always a good idea to be curious, not judgmental. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you very, very much for listening to PEM Rules. Thank you for checking the website, submitting feedback, and thank you for contacting me. Again, if you want to come on the show, just email me through the website. I'd love to host you if you want to talk about any pediatric emergency medicine related topic, whether it's an interesting patient you have, whether it's a clinical conundrum you came across, really whatever is interesting to you or you think will benefit our audience. Also, don't forget, I do have a Facebook page. Doesn't have a whole lot, but has some material that you may find helpful. So you can check out the PEM Rules Facebook page, check my articles on EP Monthly, and write back anything you want. The following outro is one of the most famous guitar riff of the 90s. This is Alive by Pearl Jam from the album 10, which is a legendary classic album. One of the best albums in the 1990s, one of the best rock bands in the 1990s, or maybe even in the history of music. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.